This is a production of WGBH2 Boston.
Tonight on a special Greater Boston, one last night of debate till the fall. This time between the two Democratic candidates, Jay Gonzalez and Bob Massie, vying to take on incumbent Governor Charlie Baker come November. It's the fourth and final night of debate week here in Greater Boston, and this one comes with a chance to win the most powerful office in state government. Jay Gonzalez served as Secretary of Administration and Finance under Governor Deval Patrick and CEO of a local health insurance company. Jay, it's good to see you.
Good to see you, too.
Bob Massie, longtime activist, former candidate for Lieutenant Governor, and most recently the Executive Director of the Sustainable Solutions Lab at UMass Boston. Bob, is always nice to see you. And as you know, you've been here before. There are no time clocks, but someone will keep track of the time you each talk, and so we'll try to keep things relatively balanced. And since there is so much to cover, the only thing I ask is that brevity be the rule of the night. Is that okay? Fine. Nice to see you both. Thanks so much for being here. Starting with you, Jay, the vast majority of what I've heard from both of you through this campaign has been what you perceive to be the minuses of Charlie Baker and the pluses of yourselves. You're not running against Baker. You're running against him. He's running against you. Spend the next couple of seconds with 20 days to go telling me why you'd be a better candidate for governor in the final and why you'd be a better governor than him.
First of all, thanks for having us.
Pleasure.
Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Bob's a great guy. We've spent a lot of good quality time together on the campaign trail. But I do think I'd be a better governor, and the reason is I have leadership experience in state government getting big things done. I worked for Governor Patrick, was one of his cabinet secretaries, oversaw the state budget. I was often the governor's point person for negotiating a lot of the big things we got through the legislature with key stakeholders. So I've been there, I've done it. It's not going to matter what Bob and I want to do to try to make a difference in regular people's lives unless we actually deliver on it. And I think I'm best positioned to do that.
Would he be a good governor?
I think he'd be a lot better governor than Charlie Baker. And that is, we are running against Charlie Baker. I mean, he has been a terrible governor from my perspective. He's not doing nearly enough to make a difference in regular people's lives. And we absolutely need a progressive Democrat. I think I'm the better one for the reason
Why are you the better one?
Well, on another radio station that shall remain unnamed.
You can say it.
On WBUR this morning, they were very clear and said that Jay is the insider candidate, I'm the outsider candidate. I think that's a fair characterization. I mean, Jay just said his time and energy has been spent up on Beacon Hill. I'm someone who has led nationally, internationally, and I think what people are looking for is really a bold leader who's able to bring people together, who understands what's happening globally.
Is he not a bold leader?
I think Jay wants to be a bold leader, but I don't think he's had the full imagination of all our opportunities.
Let's pick a couple of issues. Speaking of your criticism of the governor, I picked a couple of issues where you've both been very critical of the governor and have talked about plans for yourselves. Let's start with transportation. We've all seen the pictures of people that long march through the tunnel back to Maverick Station. We know about Alewife. But the flip side, Baker's purchased hundreds of new subway cars, hundreds of new buses, made some investment. What's your better plan to fix the transportation mess in Massachusetts, Jay Gonzalez?
But just on the point you made, though, first, it's really important. He bought a lot of new cars because Deval Patrick put the money in place when we were there to buy the new cars through the gas tax increase, through a sales tax increase that's dedicated to the T. Deval Patrick signed the contract to buy those cars, and Charlie Baker is picking the fruit off of the trees that we seeded.
But since you mentioned Deval, Commonwealth Magazine said that his capital investments for the next 5 years, Charlie Baker's, would double what Deval Patrick did in the last 5 years with you.
Because Deval Patrick put more revenue in place. But it's not nearly enough. And Charlie Baker's not being honest about the fact that we need to invest much more in our system. I would do that. I would ask those doing well in this state to pay more because our transportation system is one of the worst in the country.
What would you invest in?
And it is affecting people's quality of lives in a very real way. The other thing I'd do is fire Keolis, the private operator of the commuter rail. They're doing a terrible job, and I would be the first governor to bring it in-house and manage it directly.
What would you invest in to make it better, quickly if you can?
Well, we got to invest to make the existing system better, to improve regional transit service all across the state, our roads and bridges all across the state. And we need to invest in expansion projects that are going to help drive economic growth and improve quality of life.
What's your specific plan here, Bob?
Well, we need a 10-year vision. I mean, it is terrible here in Boston, but it is also terrible across the state. You know, it takes 90 minutes to get in from Haverhill or to get in from Worcester or all over the region. So we need to have that understanding of where we need to go. Virtually every other major industrial society has figured out that we need to connect our cities and we connect town. That's the key to economic vitality. I agree that we need to fire Keolis. In fact, I suggested that before he did. So I like to look ahead. We need to speed up our trains, but we also need to lay the groundwork for high-speed rail. Chinese have 12,000 miles. The Japanese have had 160-mile-an-hour trains for 20 years. We have nothing, and it's not going to get fixed by doing more of the same.
Do you have a cost estimate on what you and then you are proposing to do on the transportation system, roughly?
We do know that it's going to be billions of dollars, but it's going to be spread over 10 years, and we do know that the question isn't just what it costs, but what would be the economic benefits of doing it. And look, as I say, if we don't actually significantly invest in this, then it's not going to fix itself. Congestion has gotten worse by 40% in the last 10 years.
Do you support congestion pricing?
No, actually. And
do you?
I support trying it. There was a pilot program that Governor Baker vetoed that would have lowered tolls to incentivize people to drive during non-peak hours to see if it reduced congestion during rush hour.
The reason I hesitated.
We're 47th in the country.
The reason I hesitated.
One at a time, if I can.
We're 47th in the country when it comes to commute times. People are stuck in traffic for way too long. We have to stop studying it, which is all Charlie Baker's wanting to do, and actually start taking action. And I'm going to be a governor that is in the job to do the job and make a difference in people's lives in a way that they feel.
Jim,
and this is the biggest issue
I just want to
people
step
talk
in here.
about all across the
One
state.
second, yes.
I want to step in here because the reason I hesitated is that I want to be a people's governor.
You didn't hesitate. You said no.
Well, no, but I paused while I was
okay.
thinking about it. And the reason is because I am concerned about what hits the people, lower income, working families, and we already are demanding a lot of them. All of their expenses have gone up, and their wages have remained flat.
Well, let's talk about demanding of them. I looked at your websites and things you had said. You both support North-South Rail, correct? Mm-hmm. Baker administration says $12 billion. Critics say it's inflated. Let's say $10 billion. You both support East-West, another $500 million. You both support South Coast Rail, $3 billion. Right there alone is 16 or 17 billion.
Have you priced out the benefits? The
benefits I'm just asking what the
No, but I'll give you an example. South Station, the redoing of South Station is going to cost $4 to $6 billion by itself. We should put that into North-South Rail and then sell the land that we will no longer need and put that into a trust. In addition, we understand and we know clearly that this will provide an economic boost to the entire community, and that's a benefit that comes from investing in those costs.
Where does the money come from on your end there, Jay, for these transportation things we just talked about?
I'm going to immediately be asking our Department of Revenue to give me options for how we ask those doing well in this state to pay more so that we can make some of these critical investments that will make a difference in regular people's lives and help drive economic growth going forward.
Why should, if I can just stay on this for a second, you mentioned this last time. Why should a voter pick you, Jay, and say, when you're saying essentially, trust me, I'll come up with a progressive tax, undefined, with an amount that I will not tell you about in advance? Would you vote for such a person?
I'm asking people to vote for me. I've been there. I've done it before. I managed the state budget during the worst fiscal crisis the state had faced in decades. I found ways during that crisis to increase investment in transportation.
Look, and I'm entitled to know.
Jim, I got to jump in here.
Well, I'm being really clear, though, Jim.
One second.
I'm being really clear, though, that I'm not going to ask lower and middle income people who are already struggling to get ahead to pay more. I'm running.
So give me one example of progressive tax that would not ask low and middle income people that would be on your list.
There are lots of big corporations across the state that are benefiting from tax breaks that have been put in place a long time ago that no one ever looks at to see whether they're creating more jobs or not.
Look, this is a huge cloud of vagueness, and it was pointed out by the Lowell Sun that I have offered detailed ideas, and I'll just give you a couple. I mean, first of all, we need to continue to work on a progressive tax. You should know better than anyone. We've been fighting for that for 20 years. There are 34 other states that already have it.
Years away, if you're successful.
Maybe yes, maybe no. All right? So we have that. We need to move forward on renewable energy. I mean,
that if you can.
Yeah, sorry, I'll try not to do that. Yeah. So we start with the progressive tax. We need to move forward on a full built-out.
But you can't, with all due respect, you can't just say progressive tax when the Supreme Judicial Court said no to the millionaire's tax.
Look, yes.
Name me one progressive tax that would pass constitutional muster, Bob Massie.
We know that, first of all, that was turned down on a technicality that you know well. Secondly, we need to have a discussion. Do we want to just skid into the future and not have real prosperity for everyone? But let me just share with you.
Can you name one tax that's constitutionally permissible, that's progressive?
I want to go to talking about full build-out of renewable. Hang on a second. Okay. I want to finish here. Full build-out of renewable energy, which would not only lower the $18 billion we spend on fossil fuel, it would also allow us to generate as much as $6 billion in new revenue. As I mentioned, we
by
could
selling excess.
Yes, we could be exporting energy. We should be imposing taxes on heavy trucks, which are doing damage. There's a lot of different things.
I got to hold you there.
Hold on. One more thing. We have these huge piggy bank, super wealthy apartments that are being sold at $5-6 million. We should have a tax on that and a tax on their transfer. You know, right here in Dalton Place, the Millennium Towers. These are being built, you know, to park money from overseas.
Okay, I got to hold you both there because I want to talk about the other half of what were money from the millionaire's tax, which you both supported, would have gone education. The legislature went home after 3 years of study, to the great disappointment, I would argue, of virtually everybody in Massachusetts, I know including you, without a plan to level the playing field between poorer and wealthier communities. What's your plan there, Jay?
We need to do what the legislature was working on and the Senate passed to actually increase funding from the state, particularly for lower income districts. We've got one of the biggest achievement gaps in the country. Teachers are being laid off across the state. And it is totally unacceptable. The most important thing we do collectively through government is ensure every child has access to a great public education. And we are falling down on that job. And this is an example. We're talking about transportation and the need for additional investment in education, transportation. Charlie Baker's whole approach to the job is no more money. Where are we? What do we have? What's the best we can do? What I'm advocating for is where do we need to be and how do we get there? And it's going to be a very clear choice in this election. I'm being honest about the fact with people that I am going to find a way to raise additional revenue to make these investments that are going to make a huge difference in regular people's lives all across the state, and that we desperately need to do, because if we don't invest in education and transportation, we are moving backwards.
With all due respect, I just want to point out every single question you have addressed to Jay first. Now, he may be in your line of sight, but I have some things that I want to say. So, for example, this is an example of failure of the governor's leadership. He could have stepped in. He could have said, we have had 25 years of failure as that algorithm, the formula for the Chapter 70, as it's called, is getting out of whack. And by the way, let me point out something else. One of the reasons that so many communities are struggling is because they're paying increased health care costs and because they're paying transportation costs. Now, that's why I'm for single payer. That's something I've fought for 40 years. Jay Gonzalez has been for it for about 20 months. And I believe that is a key to the solution of this problem. It's not just one solution in one area, but an integrated understanding of our economy, because our economy is damaging people. It's damaging young people. It's damaging poor people. It may be fine for the folks at the top, but we need leadership to set us on a path to real prosperity for everybody.
Let's stay on that related thing. I'll ask you first here.
Yeah, please.
You've both been critical of the governor here and elsewhere for lack of leadership. It's the legislature that after 3 years did not pass this education reform thing where there may be a constitutional violation. It's the legislature that failed to pass an important measure about hospital reimbursement. It's the legislature, I can go on and on down the list, it's overwhelmingly Democratic. Every single issue that you care about could be done without Charlie Baker, and when he vetoed it, they could override his veto. Why are the Democrats not as culpable in your mind?
Because the Democrats are out of touch with what's going around, and I'll say that as someone who admires many of the people on the legislature, but here's the reality. The Democratic Party needs to open up, it needs to grow, it needs to be in touch with its younger members, it needs to be in touch with the millions of people who are hurting in this state and not playing games and enabling the governor to do the things that, you know, push stuff out so that he doesn't have to.
Is the Democratic legislature out of touch?
No, I don't think they're out of touch, but I think they need to be pushed. Right now, we've got a governor who isn't asking them to do anything. To the extent any good stuff has happened, the minimum wage increase, paid family leave, it's been because activists pushed for it and the legislature passed it. And Governor Baker got pushed into a corner into signing it. He hasn't advocated for anything. He isn't asking the legislature to provide more funding for education or more funding for transportation or any of these other issues that you mentioned. And if there's a governor who's providing leadership and some healthy tension, working in collaboration with the legislature and other stakeholders, we can get big things done, and we have to.
So I want to point that out. I mean, once again, Jay is saying that he can work with the folks on the inside. I'm a movement leader. I'm somebody who worked on the South African anti-apartheid movement. I worked on climate change, organized the first big event 26 years ago. I understand that it's not just about what happens inside on Beacon Hill. I think people are sick of that process. It's what happens outside as we mobilize all those forces, as we understand where we need to go, and we identify the moment where we can act.
Let's talk about something, if I may.
Speak to that.
Very quickly, please.
Jim, I think a good indicator of the ability to be a movement leader is the strength of a campaign. That's what campaigns are about. We're in the endorsement of the Democratic Party by over 70% of the vote. We have thousands of volunteers and supporters all across this state. Endorsements from Progressive Mass, Progressive Dems of Mass, lots of grassroots organizations.
I'd like to respond to that.
We have built a very strong campaign, which I think demonstrates we've got a lot of enthusiasm and support and the ability to mobilize supporters, which I'm very proud of, and we've got a lot of excitement behind the campaign.
15 seconds, because I want to move on to housing.
I was endorsed by Our Revolution, by far the largest progressive group in Massachusetts. I was endorsed this morning by the Boston Herald. So I show that I can span across all these different categories. People are looking for an outsider with energy who is not going to be beholden to Beacon Hill and who has not raised as much money. We've both had challenges, but his money has mostly come from those who are used to working and paying for access on Beacon Hill.
No, that's not true, Bob.
Let's talk, if we can, about, you mentioned several times having to go beyond Beacon Hill. In the 1990s, people went beyond Beacon Hill and repealed rent control in Massachusetts. And one of the great ironies is the 3 communities that had rent control voted to keep it. The 348 that didn't voted to get rid of it. Affordability of housing is a huge issue. Would you lead on reinstitution of some form of rent control to keep rents down?
I call it rent stabilization because it's different.
You support that?
Yes, and because we face a crisis. Everywhere in the state, and particularly in the Boston area, people are being driven out. There's a reason that all those millennials are living with their parents. They can't afford it. There's a reason that people in Roxbury and Dorchester and all of the communities of color are facing a crisis as they're being pushed out. We absolutely need to address the affordable housing crisis, but it's not just rents. It's also building supply. It's also opening up new forms of ownership, new forms of finance. We can handle this. Let me tell you, it's been handled in other parts of the country and the world. But, you know, again, we are not setting up for a future of prosperity, and we're damaging the people who are our core citizens and who need the government to recognize their problems.
I want to stay on a concrete thing, though. Rent control, rent stabilization, some sort of rent regulation, which the people said no to 20-plus years ago. Would you support its reinstitution?
I wouldn't right now, no. This is a crisis, and we have to address it. It is one of this and transportation, I think, are the 2 biggest things dragging our economy backwards. But I think we need regulatory reform first. To encourage not just Boston, Cambridge, and Somerville to create more housing, but everybody else in this state. We need to look at each region of the state differently, that the affordable housing crisis manifests itself in different ways in different parts of the state. We need different solutions. We need to invest more in subsidizing more affordable housing, but this is a crisis. There's a lot we need to do. I wouldn't go straight to rent control.
Can we talk about
I didn't say straight. What I said, I've lived in Somerville since the 1980s. I've watched my own neighbors be driven out. I understand the pressures that they're under, and it's true all over. And here's the thing, Jim. The people at the top, whether it's the leadership in our legislature or whether it's the elites in Boston business and so forth, they don't understand what folks are going through. I mean, I can tell you, people they're paying vast amounts of money, more than they can afford on rent, and you cannot afford a rent working even for $15 a minute.
He's got 90 more seconds than you, so you can take a little bit extra time here, Jay. I want to talk about race for an issue. A couple of really troubling stories about the capital city in the last week or so in the news. Wes Lowry at the Washington Post, formerly the Globe, led a study that showed if you're white and killed in Boston, you are twice as likely to have your murder solved as if you're black. We read a day or two later that an analysis of the Boston Public Schools was done and that they are, quote, resegregated was the term. Give me something concrete on both fronts that a governor can do to address both of these racial divides.
Well, I think there are a lot of big issues that we need to address. One of the big ones is our criminal justice system, which I think is the biggest civil rights issue of our time. We have huge disparities in terms of the incarceration rates of people of color versus non-people of color, and it's an institutional problem. So I've got a whole series of reforms I propose, from getting rid of mandatory minimum sentences, investing more in the underlying causes of crime, but ultimately we need to be attacking poverty too. We need to be giving people opportunities to get ahead. And my whole campaign is about making a difference for the little guy, whether it's making affordable housing available, public transportation, child care and preschool. But when it comes to the racial divide and gaps in wealth and income and other opportunities, we need an intentional effort around this. And we need a governor that's going to provide leadership on it. And right now we've got a governor that never talks about it.
You mentioned criminal justice, and a couple of days ago in New Orleans at Dillard University, Senator Elizabeth Warren said the criminal justice system from front to back is racist. Is it?
I think there are institutional problems that are resulting in racial disparities. I don't know that I go so far to say it's racist, but I think we should be really concerned. I understand her point, and I think we got to be really concerned with the consequences of our system, which is why we need to reform it. And that's why I've had a proposal from the very beginning of my campaign.
Look, I have worked on this for 30 years.
First, is Elizabeth Warren right?
We have a serious problem with institutionalized racism, where our attitudes get hardened into structures. I was just out at MCI Norfolk Prison. I talked to 60 inmates. 59 of them were African American, and they talked to me both about the backgrounds that they came from, the problems that they're facing, their desire, and just for that instance, we're seeing that the programs which would allow them to re-enter society are being cut. So that's ridiculous. But you didn't mention the color of wealth study that said that the average white family is worth $250,000. The average black family is worth zero. Net worth of zero.
Right.
Well, effectively. So, look, I just gave a major speech on this on August 2nd. This is something that I have been trying to bring forward. I've asked Jay to speak about it more deliberately. My solution, first of all, is real leadership. Now, I have worked on race for a long time. I would like to set aside a period of weeks where we invite every single institution that is willing to sit down and talk about race and acknowledge it. It's not something that's all on one side. We need to acknowledge the history of problems. We need to hear each other as individuals. We need to come together and understand each other. And that's something, look, I have advocated for a truth and reconciliation process. Remember, I wrote a long book about South Africa. I understand how racial tensions can build. All
right. Catholic Church. We saw the atrocity that was disclosed in the Pennsylvania grand jury and Supreme Court a couple of days ago. Is there anything you do as governor in our state, which was pretty much ground zero in terms of the outing of this atrocity?
Yeah.
Is there anything you do to deal with this problem, not just within the Catholic Church, but the whole issue of sexual assault, sexual violence perpetrated against young kids? What's that?
You're starting with him again.
I am starting with him again, then I'll come back to you in a second.
But
actually, let me go to him so he doesn't yell at me for this.
Yeah,
you go first.
I mean, I just want you to be aware of it.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Look, sexual harassment is a major problem, and it's part of a larger concern about sexism in our society.
What would you do about it?
Well, first of all, I put in a 32-page proposal about women's equality and gender justice. I laid that out, and I said one of the things a male governor needs to do is help talk to men about their own behavior and their own understanding, just like a white governor should talk to white people to help us all come together. So I have laid out a detailed plan, but one of the things is greater transparency. We need to hold people accountable, whether it's in the church, whether it's in government, whether it's at the legislature, which has had its own problems, whether it's in business, and we also need to attack the disparities, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in pay equity.
Okay.
That's a fundamental requirement of the job.
What would you do here?
So, a couple things. But let me just say, sexual harassment and discrimination, the Me Too movement has shown, is a sickness in our culture. It is pervasive.
I'm talking about sexual violence in these cases, beyond.
And sexual violence. We have to address it. So a couple of things. One is we need a governor that's talking about this issue. We don't have that right now. We need to hold not only the perpetrators of it accountable, but the institutions accountable.
How do you hold the perpetrators accountable?
Well, prosecuting them, taking whatever action is appropriate.
Based on, do you know Senator Lovejoy is?
Can I just go back? He had a long time to talk.
Go ahead.
A couple things I want to say. This is an issue I've talked a lot about on the campaign. I met with workers in the restaurant industry who are subject to sexual harassment all the time because they're paid a lower minimum wage, their income's dependent on tips, and so they tolerate behavior they shouldn't have to tolerate. It's one of the reasons why, one of the things I think we can do is eliminate the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers, which has worked in other states to reduce sexual harassment. I have said the casino license for the Wynn Company should be revoked. This is an example of an institution enabling this type of behavior. Even though Steve Wynn is gone, the company knew this was happening. They didn't do anything about it. They didn't disclose it to the Gaming Commission, and they're just as culpable.
I don't think we should have had casinos in the first place.
Should it be revoked?
Probably.
I want to ask you about accountability question here. I started to say Senator Lovejoy from Salem called my radio show yesterday in the wake of this Pennsylvania thing. She was a victim, survivor of sexual assault, as was her twin brother at age 6. He was subsequently sexually assaulted by a priest when he was an older boy. She is behind the removal of the statute of limitations in criminal prosecutions of minor victims of sexual assault. Would you support the elimination of statute of limitations?
It's the first time I've actually considered that specific question, but I think my initial reaction is yes, these are horrific crimes, and people shouldn't be able to escape them because the calendar is flipped
How about
over.
you,
I
Jay?
absolutely would. It's one of the problems, it sounds like, in Pennsylvania, where they can't go after these people because the statute of limitations is run. This has ruined people's lives.
But
It has ruined
let him
people's
finish,
lives.
please.
And it's one of the areas where one of the most important responsibilities of government is protecting people. And this is a way where we could protect people who've been abused in a way that is really damaging, and we've got to stand up for them.
I just want to come back to point out this is part of a continuum of discrimination, of domination, where we simply aren't focusing on how vulnerable so many women's communities and girls are. And that's why you need a governor who's willing to articulate this clearly and to advance it across the whole spectrum of issues, all the way up to and including sexual violence.
15 seconds each, and then we're done. What's something I didn't touch upon that matters a lot to you? That
Climate
people at home
change.
should know
I mean,
about?
we need to move to 100% renewable energy as quickly as possible. Every other country is doing it. This governor is in the pocket of our utilities, fossil fuel utilities. They're ripping money out of our wallets every week and preventing us from moving forward.
15 for you, Jay.
Early education and child care. It is game-changing for young kids if they have access to good quality child care in preschool. It allows their parents to go to work to support their families. By the end of my first term as governor, every child and family will have access to it.
Jay, I really appreciate you being here. Good
Thank
luck
you.
on
It
September
was great.
4th. Bob, same with you. Thanks so
Thank
much
you.
for your time. I appreciate it. That's it for Debate Week here in Greater Boston. But if you missed anything, it's all online. The discussion with the Republican Senate candidate Beth Lindstrom, Secretary of State debate with incumbent Bill Galvin and challenger Josh Zakim, the Massachusetts 7th Congressional District debate with incumbent Michael Capuano and challenger Ayanna Pressley, and tonight's debate between the Democrats running for Governor Jay Gonzalez and Bob Massie. You can find it all in full at greaterboston.org. One final thought before we go. After President Barack Obama was elected in 2008, he declared that elections have consequences. He was right then. He was right here on the campaign trail in 2016, too.
Don't boo. Oh. Don't boo. Oh. Come on.
In other words, you don't vote, you don't get to complain about what happens next. So please get out and vote September 4th. And thanks so much for watching.